He was pregnant, alone, and collapsing on the street, while her ex-husband, now a wealthy millionaire, stood watching with his mistress by his side. But the choice he made in that single moment would leave everyone shocked and change their lives forever. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. City pulsed with life that afternoon, its streets alive with the hum of engines, the shuffle of hurried footsteps, and the endless chatter of people lost in their own worlds. Expensive cars lined the boulevard, their polished exteriors gleaming under the sun, while designer boutiques flaunted the latest displays behind glass walls. It was a place where wealth was not just present but flaunted, where appearances spoke louder than words. In the middle of it all walked Ethan, tall and composed, his suit tailored to perfection, his shoes clicking confidently on the pavement. His arm was draped casually around Isabella, the woman at his side, who turned heads with her elegance and sharp beauty. Her dress shimmered faintly with every step, her laughter carrying over the sound of the street like a melody rehearsed to perfection. People noticed them. They always did. Together they looked untouchable, a picture of luxury and control. Ethan had worked tirelessly to reach this point, climbing from nothing into the shimmering world of boardrooms, skyscrapers, and money. And Isabella, with her striking features and carefully chosen words, fit seamlessly into the image he projected. They appeared as if they belonged exactly here, above the noise, above the rush. But that illusion was about to shatter. As Ethan guided Isabella across the crosswalk, a flicker of movement on the opposite side of the street caught his eye. At first, he thought it was nothing more than another pedestrian pushing through the crowded sidewalk. But then the figure stumbled. A woman, her hand pressed against her swollen belly, her steps unsteady, her skin pale beneath the afternoon sun. Something deep within Ethan clenched at the sight, a recognition that bypassed. His chest tightened, his breath faltered. It was Claire. Claire, the woman he once promised forever. Claire, the woman he left behind when ambition pulled him in another direction. And now, she was standing, or rather, barely standing, right in front of him, on the same street that displayed his new life like a stage. For a heartbeat, the city seemed to quiet, as though the rush of people and noise had dimmed just for this moment. Ethan stared, frozen, disbelief. She looked so different from the woman he remembered, yet painfully the same. Her face bore the softness of someone carrying new life, but exhaustion and strain etched lines where once there had been laughter. Her clothes were simple, almost worn, a stark contrast to Isabella's gleaming dress beside him. Isabella noticed his sudden pause and tugged lightly at his arm. "Ethan?" she said, her voice low but edged with impatience. "What's wrong?" She followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing as they landed on Claire. There was no recognition in Isabella's expression, only curiosity, then irritation when she noticed Ethan could not look away. Claire's steps faltered again. One hand braced against her belly, as though cradling both herself and the fragile life within, the other reaching out in vain for balance. She looked around, as though the world around her had grown too fast, too blurred to steady herself against. Ethan's lips parted, but no sound came. His feet felt cemented to the ground, his mind scrambling to catch up with what his eyes already knew. This was not some stranger. This was not someone he could simply walk past. This was Claire, his ex-wife, and she was struggling right there in front of him. And then it happened. Her knees buckled, her body swayed forward, and before anyone nearby could react, she collapsed onto the pavement. The sound of her fall was muffled by the collective gasp of onlookers, a ripple of shock spreading through the crowd. Bags dropped, people rushed forward, voices rose in alarm. "Someone help her!" a woman cried. "She's pregnant," another shouted. The honking cars mixed with frantic voices as the street turned into a blur of movement and panic. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. For a split second he stood rooted in place, his mind at war with itself. He had left this woman, closed that chapter of his life, convinced himself it was for the best. And yet, as he saw her lying there on the hard pavement, her hair fanned out around her face, her hands still instinctively shielding her belly, none of that mattered. A flood of emotions tore through him. Guilt, fear, regret, and something deep. His hand twitched at his side, wanting to reach out, to run to her. But another hand clamped down on his arm. "Either?" "No?" Isabella hissed, her voice sharp and urgent. She pulled at him with surprising strength, her manicured nails digging into the fabric of his suit. "We should go. Let someone else deal with it." Her tone carried a blend of disdain and fear, as though the mere act of acknowledging Claire would stain the image they projected. "She's not your problem anymore." But Claire was his problem, or perhaps more than that, she was his past, his mistakes embodied, and now, lying unconscious in the middle of the street, she was his present too. Ethan's jaw clenched as his gaze locked on Claire, her stillness a cruel contrast to the chaos around her. Strangers bent down, voices overlapped. Someone shouted for an ambulance. He felt every second stretch into eternity, each one demanding that he choose. The world moved on without waiting, but Ethan stood trapped in that decisive pause, caught between two lives colliding on one merciless afternoon. The sound of sirens began to wail faintly in the distance, drawing closer with each passing heartbeat. People parted on the sidewalk to give space, a circle forming around Claire's collapsed body. Some crouched near her, checking her pulse, calling her name as if their voices alone could summon her back to consciousness. Others hovered anxiously, torn between wanting to help and fearing they might make things worse. It was a scene raw with urgency, a scene Ethan could not tear his eyes from no matter how much Isabella's hand pressed against his arm. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his composure cracking beneath the weight of the moment. Memories surged unbidden. Claire laughing as the two of them painted their first apartment. Claire's quiet strength during the years when his dreams felt impossibly far. Claire's tears the night he walked away. Every memory layered atop the sight of her now, fragile and vulnerable until Ethan could barely breathe. This was not just an ex-wife. This was a woman who once knew the rhythm of his heart better than anyone. A woman carrying new life while barely able to hold herself upright. As Bella said again, her voice firmer, colder. "This is none of our business. People are already helping her. You don't need to get involved." She leaned closer, her perfume enveloping him in sharp contrast to the sharp scent of the street. "What will people think if you throw yourself into this? Do you really want to be dragged into whatever mess she's made of her life?" The words stung, though not because they held truth, because they revealed the chasm between the woman at his side and the one on the ground. Isabella saw inconvenience where Ethan saw a human being, a history, a wound that had never fully healed. He looked at Isabella then, really looked, and for the first time, the perfection of her features seemed to fade. Behind her polished smile and calculating eyes, there was no trace of compassion, no flicker of concern for another's suffering. In that moment, Ethan realized the image they projected together was built on emptiness. The sirens grew louder, and soon an ambulance screeched to a halt near the curb. Paramedics jumped out, rushing through the crowd with practiced urgency. They knelt beside Claire, checking her vitals, carefully lifting her onto a stretcher. The crowd murmured, relief mixing with fear, while phones recorded the scene from every angle. Ethan's stomach churned as he watched, every instinct screaming at him to push through the circle, to be there when she opened her eyes. But Isabella's grip remained tight, her nails biting into his skin as though she knew exactly what he was thinking. "Don't you dare," she whispered fiercely, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "If you go to her now, you undo everything. Your reputation, your future, us. Leave it. Walk away." Her words painted the choice starkly. Image or humanity, reputation or conscience. Ethan stood at the crossroads, his heart pounding louder than the sirens, louder than the crowd. For too long he had chosen ambition, chosen the path that kept him rising higher, even as it left others behind. But as he watched the paramedics secure Claire on the stretcher, her hand still curled instinctively around her belly, he knew this was different. This was not about ambition or appearances. This was about life, about responsibility, about the part of himself he had buried beneath success. The crowd shifted as the stretcher was lifted, carried toward the ambulance, waiting with its back doors open. The paramedics worked quickly, their voices calm but firm as they coordinated. Someone nearby muttered, "Poor woman, she looked so weak." Another voice replied, "She's pregnant, I hope the baby's okay." Each word cut into Ethan's chest, sharper than any accusation, heavier than any judgment. He couldn't stand still anymore. With a sudden movement, he pulled his arm free from Isabella's grasp. Her gasp of shock barely registered as he stepped forward, his stride purposeful, his eyes locked on Claire. People turned to look as the millionaire and his tailored suit moved through the crowd, no longer untouchable, no longer above it all. He reached the stretcher just as the paramedics prepared to lift it into the ambulance. For a moment, he simply stood there, his hand hovering as though afraid to touch, afraid to claim a place that might not belong to him anymore. But when Claire stirred faintly, a soft sound escaping her lips, his hand moved instinctively, resting gently on hers. The paramedic glanced at him. "Are you family?" the man asked, his tone brisk but not unkind. Ethan hesitated, the word catching in his throat. Family. Once, she had been his everything. Now, the truth was far more complicated. But as he looked at Claire, pale and vulnerable, he knew there was only one answer he could give. He nodded firmly. "Yes," he said, his voice steady despite the storm within. "I am." Behind him, Isabella's voice rose in outrage, sharp and incredulous. "Ethan, what are you doing?" But her words were drowned out by the slam of the ambulance doors as the paramedics ushered him inside, making space for him beside Claire. The vehicle lurched forward, sirens blaring as it sped toward the hospital. Ethan sat there, his hand still wrapped around Claire's, his heart racing faster than the city outside. For the first time in years, he was not thinking about deals, appearances, or the image he so carefully curated. He was thinking only of Claire, of the child she carried, of the collapse that had shattered the illusion of his perfect life. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. Ethan stood frozen in the middle of the bustling avenue, his expensive leather shoes rooted to the pavement as if the world had suddenly stopped spinning. Claire lay collapsed on the street just a few feet away, her hands cradling her swollen stomach, her breath ragged and shallow. Gasps rose from the crowd gathering around her, strangers pulling out their phones, others kneeling beside her to see if she was. Isabella tugged sharply at his arm, her manicured nails digging into his sleeve, her whisper cut like a blade, soft yet venomous. "Don't just stand there, Ethan. She's no longer your problem. Let them handle it." The words echoed in his ears, bouncing between his pride and his conscience. For years he had buried his guilt beneath success and wealth, convincing himself he had moved beyond the ruins of his marriage. But the sight before him now shattered that illusion. Claire's face, pale and damp with sweat, was not just any stranger's. It was the woman he had once promised forever to, the mother of the child he had abandoned. His heart thundered in his chest, so loud it drowned out the car horns blaring impatiently in the distance. He saw the uncertainty in the eyes of the bystanders, the murmurs spreading like fire through the crowd. "Isn't that Ethan Callahan?" one whispered. "That's his ex-wife, isn't it?" another asked, astonished, and the words that made his blood run cold. "She's pregnant." Ethan's breath caught, his eyes snapping back to Claire. Pregnant. The word lingered like a blow to the ribs. He hadn't known, he hadn't cared enough to know, and now, there she was, alone, fragile, vulnerable, while he stood next to another woman, paralyzed by shame. Isabella's grip tightened. "Ethan, let's go. This is pathetic. She's trying to get attention. Do not make a fool of yourself in front of all these people." Her tone was laced with irritation and disgust. But something inside him stirred, something he thought had long since withered away. Conscience, compassion, the remnants of the man he used to be before ambition devoured his humanity. For the first time in years, Ethan ignored Isabella's voice. His body moved on its own, his feet carrying him forward until he was kneeling on the cold concrete beside Claire. The crowd hushed, stunned at the sight of the sharply dressed millionaire lowering himself into the chaos. Ethan reached out, his hand trembling slightly as it brushed against Claire's arm. "Claire," he whispered, his voice rough with a mixture of fear and regret. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't respond. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, her face contorted in pain. Ethan's chest constricted at the sight. Memories of her laughter, her warmth, her resilience, all the things he had taken for granted flashed before him. He had walked away, but now here she was, crumbling before his very eyes. Isabella's voice pierced the moment. "Ethan, get up. You're humiliating yourself." He ignored her. He slid one arm under Claire's shoulders, carefully lifting her from the harsh pavement. The weight of her body against him felt heavier than it should, not because of her physical form, but because of the burden of years lost, trust shattered, love abandoned. He held her close, whispering her name again, desperate for a sign of recognition. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Someone muttered, "I can't believe it, he's helping her." Another voice chimed in. About time. That's his responsibility. The shame pressed hard on Ethan's shoulders, but alongside it was something else. For the first time in years, he realized he could not run from this moment. Not this time. He turned to one of the bystanders kneeling nearby. Call an ambulance. Now. His tone was firm, commanding, a stark contrast to the vulnerability in his eyes. The man nodded quickly, dialing emergency services as Ethan adjusted Claire carefully in his arms. He could feel her heartbeat fluttering weakly against his chest, and the fear clawed at him. What if she didn't make it? What if the child didn't make it? Isabella crossed her arms, her lips curled in disdain. Unbelievable, she muttered, loudly enough for those around to hear. You're throwing everything away for a woman who means nothing to you anymore. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked up at her, his voice low but cutting through the air. She will never mean nothing to me. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, Isabella's smirk faltered, her confidence shaken. The crowd's whispers grew louder, eyes darting between the three of them, but Ethan no longer cared. All that mattered was the fragile woman in his arms and the faint flicker of life she carried inside her. When the ambulance siren wailed in the distance, Ethan held Claire tighter, his heart pounding. For years he had been blind to what truly mattered, but in this moment, as the weight of her pressed against him, he knew he was standing at the edge of a choice that would redefine everything. The flashing lights of the approaching ambulance reflected off the glass windows of the high-rise buildings, painting the scene in urgent reds and blues. The crowd parted slowly as paramedics rushed forward, wheeling a stretcher through the chaos. Ethan refused to let go of Claire until the very last moment, his arms still protectively around her, as if his touch alone could anchor her to life. She collapsed suddenly, Ethan explained quickly, his voice unsteady yet commanding. She's pregnant. Please, help her. The paramedics lifted Claire onto the stretcher, checking her vitals, speaking in clipped professional tones. Ethan hovered nearby, every instinct screaming to stay close. Isabella stood back, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her eyes blazing with anger. She looked every bit the outsider in this moment, her carefully polished composure crumbling as Ethan's attention focused solely on his ex-wife. "You're coming with us?" one of the paramedics asked, glancing up at Ethan. "Yes," Ethan answered without hesitation. "I'm not leaving her." The words shocked even him, but once they were spoken, he knew they were true. For years, he had chosen to walk away, to leave the pieces of his past scattered on the floor. Not this time. Not when both Claire and the unborn child needed someone to stand beside them. Isabella's voice rose above the din, sharp and scornful. "Ethan, think about what you're doing. You don't owe her anything. This will ruin you." He turned to her, his expression cold, a resolve in his eyes she had never seen before. "If standing by her ruins me, then maybe I deserve it." The crowd murmured in approval, some even nodding, others whispering words of agreement. Isabella flushed, humiliated by the public's judgment. She opened her mouth to protest again, but Ethan had already stepped into the ambulance, his focus unshakable. Inside, the sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air as the vehicle lurched forward. Ethan sat beside Claire, gripping the rail of the stretcher, watching her chest rise and fall. She stirred faintly, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak. He leaned in close, his voice gentle yet desperate. "It's okay, Claire. You're not alone. I'm here." Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them back, unwilling to show weakness when she needed strength. The years of indifference, the walls he had built around his heart, all crumbled in that single moment. He realized then that no amount of wealth, no number of business victories could fill the hollow space that had grown inside him since he left her. The paramedic gave him a quick update. "Her vitals are weak, but we're stabilizing her. She needs immediate care at the hospital. The baby's heartbeat is still strong, but it's critical we get her there fast." Ethan nodded, relief washing over him at the mention of the baby's heartbeat. He sat back, gripping the edge of the seat, his mind racing. Questions battered him from every direction. Who was the father? How long had she been struggling alone? Why hadn't he seen her sooner? But beneath all the questions was a single undeniable truth. He still cared, more than he had admitted to himself in years. When the ambulance doors swung open at the hospital entrance, Ethan jumped out first, helping guide the stretcher inside. The fluorescent lights of the emergency ward cast a harsh glow over everything, but Ethan's focus never left Claire. Nurses swarmed around her, wheeling her down the corridor. A doctor's urgent voice barked orders, and Ethan followed as far as he could until a nurse held up her hand. "Sir, you'll have to wait here." The words cut him like a blade, but he nodded reluctantly, watching as the doors swung shut behind her. He stood there, motionless, the weight of everything pressing down on him. For the first time in years, Ethan Callahan, the man who prided himself on control, felt utterly powerless. Isabella stormed into the hospital minutes later, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. Her face was a mask of fury. "You've embarrassed me in front of everyone, Ethan. Do you have any idea what this will do to your reputation?" Ethan looked at her, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "Reputation means nothing right now. Do you understand that? A woman's life, her child's life, is hanging in the balance, and all you care about is appearances." She scoffed. "That woman is your ex-wife, and that child isn't even yours." The words hung heavy in the air, but Ethan's response was steady, resolute. "Maybe, maybe not, but right now, none of that matters. What matters is that she needs someone to care, and if I'm the only one who will, then so be it." For once, Isabella had no retort. She stared at him, stunned by the conviction in his voice, before spinning on her heel and storming out of the hospital. The echo of her departure faded, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts, his conscience, and the silent weight of the decision he had finally made, to stay. And for the first time in years, staying felt like the only choice that mattered. Ethan's hands trembled on the steering wheel as he drove faster than he had in years. His sleek black car weaved through the late afternoon traffic, its engine growling as he pressed the accelerator. Claire lay slumped in the passenger seat beside him, her face pale, her hand clutching her swollen belly. Every labored breath she took tightened the knot in his chest. "Stay with me, Claire," he muttered, his voice rough, almost desperate. The city lights blurred around them, but all Ethan could focus on was her faint groan and the way her eyelids. From the back seat, Isabella's voice rose in sharp protest. She had insisted on coming along, though Ethan hadn't wanted her in the car. "This is madness, Ethan. You're risking everything for her. She's not your responsibility anymore." Her tone was sharp, cold, but Ethan barely heard it. Claire stirred, her lips moving. Her voice was weak, a whisper pulled from deep within her pain. "Ethan." Her eyes cracked open, glassy with exhaustion. "Please, the baby." Ethan's heart jolted. He reached across with one hand, steadying her trembling fingers as his other gripped the wheel. "Don't talk, just hold on. I won't let anything happen to you or the baby." The words surprised him, even as they left his mouth. He hadn't thought about Claire this way in years, protectively, tenderly. He had buried that part of himself under layers of anger, pride, and regret. Yet now, watching her suffer, every wall he had built crumbled. Flashes of memory pierced his mind like lightning. Claire on their wedding day, smiling as sunlight filtered through her veil. Claire holding Liam, their son, for the first time. Tears of joy in her eyes. Claire's face hardening during their final fight, when anger had driven them to say things neither could take back. And then, the silence of their separation. Years spent apart, each scarred in different ways. "Drive faster, Ethan," Isabella snapped, her manicured nails digging into the seat. "You're not thinking clearly. Let the hospital handle it. Why risk yourself for someone who wanted nothing to do with you?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Enough, Isabella." His tone was low, warning. For the first time in a long time, she fell silent, stunned by the authority in his voice. Claire shifted again, her grip tightening on his arm. "I was so scared," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The baby? It's all I have left." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat burning. "You're not alone, Claire. Not now. Not tonight." The car screeched to a halt, under the glowing red emergency sign of the hospital. Ethan jumped out, rushing to Claire's side. Ignoring the protests of security guards and Isabella's shrill voice behind him, he scooped Claire into his arms, her body frighteningly light against his chest. People in the entrance gasped as they recognized him. The millionaire often seen in glossy magazines and tabloids, now frantic, carrying a woman who looked like she might shatter in his arms. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Isn't that his ex-wife?" someone whispered. "Pregnant?" another voice added. Ethan didn't stop to listen. He charged through the sliding doors, his voice booming with a desperation no money could conceal. "Help! Somebody help her!" Nurses rushed forward, wheeling a stretcher to meet him. He lowered Claire gently, brushing a strand of hair from her damp forehead. Her eyes flickered open briefly, meeting his. "Don't leave me," she murmured. "I won't," Ethan promised, his voice breaking. "I'll be right here." The doctors whisked her away, disappearing behind the double doors of the emergency ward. Ethan stood frozen, his chest heaving, his hands stained with the memory of her fragile weight. For the first time in years, he felt utterly powerless. Isabella stormed up to him, her heels clicking sharply on the sterile floor. "This is ridiculous. You've humiliated yourself, Ethan. Everyone is watching. Do you realize what this will do to your reputation?" Ethan turned to her, his eyes blazing. "Do you think I care about reputation right now? A woman's life, her child's life, is at risk. Leave if you can't understand that." She recoiled, stunned by the fire in his voice. For once, Isabella had no comeback. Ethan turned away from her, pacing the corridor, his expensive shoes silent against the polished floor. His mind raced. Every minute felt like an eternity. He wanted to storm into the emergency room, to demand answers, to force time itself to move faster. But all he could do was wait. A doctor finally appeared, pulling off his gloves and mask. Ethan rushed forward. "How is she? How's the baby?" His words tumbled out, raw and urgent. The doctor placed a steadying hand on his arm. "She's stable, for now. The collapse was caused by extreme stress and exhaustion. Her pregnancy is delicate. She'll need rest, care, and someone to ensure she isn't pushed beyond her limit." Ethan exhaled, the tension draining from his body all at once. But his heart still thudded painfully in his chest. He turned to the small window of the ward where Claire lay, pale but breathing steadily, machines softly humming around her. Something inside him stirred, a sense of responsibility, of regret, and something else he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't sure what it meant yet, but as he stood there, his reflection blurred in the glass, one thought became painfully clear. He couldn't walk away this time. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the hallway as Ethan paced back and forth, his expensive suit now rumpled, his tie loosened. Every few seconds he glanced toward the ward where Claire lay, resting, as though afraid she might disappear if he looked away. Isabella sat in one of the plastic waiting chairs, arms crossed, glaring at him. "You're making a fool of yourself, Ethan," she sneered. "Running around like some lovesick fool over a woman who wanted nothing to do with you. She left, remember? She divorced you." Ethan's gaze snapped to her. His voice was calm, but it carried a sharp edge. "She didn't collapse out there because of a broken marriage. She collapsed because she's fighting to keep herself and her baby alive. And whether you like it or not, I won't turn my back on her." Isabella scoffed, her voice dripping with contempt. "So what now? You'll pray the hero? The press will eat this up. Millionaire saves ex-wife. You'll look weak, Ethan. Pathetic." Ethan didn't respond. For the first time in years, he found he didn't care what the world thought of him. The man who had once calculated every move for appearances, every choice for prestige, now only cared about the pale figure lying in that hospital bed. Memories pressed harder against his mind. The nights he had worked late, missing dinner after dinner. The arguments with Claire about priorities, about family. The night she packed her things, silent tears streaming down her face as he stood frozen, unable to stop her. He had told himself she would come back, but she hadn't, and now, years later, here she was, more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. A nurse stepped into the hallway. "Mr. Lawson?" she asked, glancing at him nervously. "Yes," Ethan said, immediately stepping forward. "You can sit with her now if you'd like. She's awake, but weak. Please keep your voice calm and avoid stressing her." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. He walked into the room, the sound of beeping monitors filling the otherwise quiet space. Claire lay propped against the pillows, her face pale but her eyes open, watching him as he entered. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Claire's lips curved faintly, though the effort looked painful. "You didn't leave," she whispered. Ethan sat at her side, pulling the chair close. "I told you I wouldn't," he replied softly. "You scared me, Claire, more than I've ever been scared in my life." Her hand rested gently on her stomach. "The baby?" "Doctor says you're both stable," Ethan reassured her quickly. "But they said you need rest and care. You can't keep pushing yourself like this." Her eyes flickered, guilt and weariness mingling there. I didn't think anyone would notice if I pushed too hard." Ethan felt something twist inside him at her words. "I noticed," he said firmly. "I'll make sure you're taken care of. You won't go through this alone." Claire looked at him, searching his face, as though trying to decide if his promise meant what it once might have meant. Her eyes shimmered with unspoken questions, doubts born of years of pain. But she said nothing, simply closing her eyes and leaning back into the pillows, trusting him in silence. Ethan sat there, watching her chest rise and fall, his mind reeling with emotions he could barely contain. For the first time in years, he realized he wanted to be more than a bystander in Claire's life. He wanted to be there. For her, for the baby, for the family they once had and perhaps still could have in some new form. Behind him, through the glass panel in the door, Isabella's furious eyes burned holes into his back. But Ethan didn't care. His world had shifted the moment Claire collapsed on that street, and there was no turning back now. As the machines hummed softly, Ethan leaned forward, resting his hand lightly on the bed near Claire's. "You're safe now," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he said it for her or for himself. Either way, he meant it. The polished marble floors of the hospital gleamed under the bright fluorescent lights, their sterile shine reflecting the tension in the air. Ethan paced the hallway, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Each second felt heavier than the last as he replayed Claire collapsing in the street. Her pale face, her weakened body, the way she had whispered his name, it haunted him. The sound of sharp heels clicking against the floor broke through his thoughts. Isabella's entrance was as dramatic as ever, her sleek designer dress hugging her figure, her long hair cascading down her shoulders. She stormed into the waiting area like a tempest, her eyes blazing with fury. People turned their heads, sensing her storm of anger before a word even left her lips. "You are," Isabella hissed, her voice laced with venom as she stopped in front of him. "I stood there on that street, humiliated, while you ran off with her. With her, your pathetic, pregnant ex-wife." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, steadying himself. "Isabella, lower your voice. This is a hospital." But Isabella wasn't interested in lowering anything. Her rage only escalated. "Don't you dare tell me what to do. Do you know how you made me look? People saw you, people saw us, and instead of staying with me, your actual partner, you ran back to that broken woman lying on the ground like trash." The words hit him like a slap, and for a moment, Ethan's composure slipped. His eyes darkened, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous tone. "Don't call her that." Isabella blinked, caught off guard by the steel in his voice. But she recovered quickly, her lips twisting into a smirk. "Oh, I see. Suddenly the saint has awakened in you? Don't tell me you're feeling guilty. Don't tell me you still care about her." Ethan took a step closer, his broad frame towering over her. "Claire collapsed, Isabella. She could have died. The baby could have died. And you expect me to just walk away? To pretend I didn't see it happen?" His voice cracked slightly at the end, and the sound of his own vulnerability surprised him. But Isabella was relentless. "Yes, that's exactly what I expected. She's not your responsibility anymore. You divorced her, remember? You chose me, and I refuse to be humiliated while you play hero to your ex-wife." Ethan stared at her, his chest rising and falling as anger built inside him. He thought of Claire lying in the hospital bed, fragile and vulnerable. And then he looked at Isabella, who stood before him, dripping with jealousy and venom. Something inside him began to shift, something he could no longer ignore. "You don't get it," Ethan said quietly, his voice trembling with the weight of realization. "This isn't about humiliation or appearances. This is about life, a woman's life, my child's life." Isabella's face twisted in disgust. Your child? Oh, so now you admit it? Now you want to claim it? After abandoning her for years? Don't make me laugh, Ethan. You're nothing but a hypocrite. Her words sliced through him, but instead of breaking him, they ignited a fire. His fists clenched tighter, his jaw set harder. Enough, he growled. I won't let you talk about her like that. Not here, not now. The waiting room had gone silent. People were pretending not to listen, but every eye flicked toward them, every ear strained to catch the venom of Isabella's fury and the uncharacteristic fire in Ethan's defense. Isabella leaned in, her voice now a sharp whisper filled with menace. You're going to regret this, you hear me? If you walk down this path, you'll lose me forever. It's her or me, Ethan. Choose. The ultimatum hung in the air like a dagger suspended between them. Ethan's lips parted slightly, but no words came. His silence was louder than any declaration could have been. And in that silence, Isabella's fury reached its breaking point. Isabella's manicured fingers tightened around the strap of her handbag, as though it were the only thing tethering her to reality. Her chest heaved, her breath short and sharp. The ultimatum had been thrown, and she waited, her eyes burning into Ethan's face, demanding his loyalty. But Ethan's gaze wasn't on her. His eyes had drifted to the closed door of Claire's hospital room. His silence spoke volumes, louder than if he had shouted his decision. And that silence cut Isabella deeper than any rejection. You're pathetic, she spat finally, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and desperation. You think you're being noble, don't you? Playing savior, pretending to care. But you're weak, Ethan. Weak and sentimental, and she's going to use that against you, just like she always did. Ethan turned his head slowly to face her again, his expression carved from stone. You don't know her, he said, his voice calm but heavy with conviction. Not like I do. You've never seen her fight to keep going when everything was against her. You've never seen her sacrifice. You'll never understand. Isabella's mouth fell open slightly, stunned by his words. This wasn't the Ethan she knew, the indulgent, self-absorbed man who thrived on power and control. This was someone else, someone who still carried the shadow of the man he used to be, before greed had twisted his. The realization stung. You're choosing her, Isabella whispered, her voice trembling. After everything I've given you, everything we've built, you're choosing her. Ethan didn't answer. His silence stretched on, a verdict without words. And in that moment, Isabella knew. Tears of fury welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she straightened her back, her expression hardening into ice. Fine, she hissed. But don't come crawling back to me when she drags you down again. Don't say I didn't warn you. With that, she spun on her heel, her heels clacking furiously against the tile as she stormed toward the exit. People parted instinctively, the storm of her wrath leaving a trail in its wake. Ethan didn't watch her go. His eyes remained fixed on Claire's door, his breathing heavy, his mind racing. Isabella's ultimatum had ripped open something inside him, a realization he had avoided for years. All the luxury, all the parties, all the empty indulgence, it had cost him more than he was willing to admit. And now, faced with Claire's fragility, with the life of their unborn child hanging in the balance, he saw the truth clearer than ever. The choice had been made the moment he lifted Claire from the street. He sank onto one of the plastic chairs lining the hallway, his head dropping into his hands. The weight of everything crashed over him. The anger in Isabella's voice, the fear etched in Claire's pale face, the whispers of the crowd who had witnessed his moment of reckoning. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the mask he had carefully constructed begin to crack. Abe, a nurse, passed by, pausing to glance at him with something like understanding. She's stable for now, the nurse said gently, her voice pulling him out of the storm of his thoughts. The doctor will update you soon. Ethan lifted his head, nodding, his throat tight with emotion. Thank you, he whispered. As the nurse walked away, Ethan leaned back against the chair, exhaling slowly. Isabella was gone, but her words lingered like poison in the air. Yet beneath the sting, beneath the fury, a strange sense of clarity began to bloom. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about wealth, appearances, or pride. He was thinking about Claire, about the baby, about what kind of man he wanted to be when the door to that hospital room finally opened. And though Isabella's fury had been loud and scorching, it was his silence, the silence that had chosen Claire, that would change the course of everything that came next. The hospital room was dim, the blinds drawn to soften the harsh afternoon light. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor was the only sound filling the silence between them. Claire lay against the pillows, her face pale but calmer now, her breathing steadier. Ethan stood at her bedside, his hands clasped together so tightly that his knuckles whitened. For years, he had thought himself immune to weakness, armored by wealth, power, and pride. In this moment, faced with the woman he had once loved and the life growing inside her, all of that armor crumbled. Claire shifted slightly, her hand instinctively resting over her belly. Her eyes met his, guarded, tired, and full of a quiet strength he had nearly forgotten. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry, but he forced himself to speak. He began softly, "I know I don't deserve to stand here. I know I'm the last person you want to see." Her lips pressed together, and she didn't answer. The silence cut deep, but he pressed on. "I was blind," he admitted, voice low. "Blinded by money, by the thrill of power, by Isabella whispering in my ear about everything I deserved. I told myself I was moving on, that leaving you behind was the price of success. But the truth," he paused, struggling as the words caught in his chest. "The truth is, I abandoned you. I abandoned us." Claire's eyes glistened, but she held her composure. "You didn't just abandon us, Ethan," she said quietly, each word deliberate. "You shattered everything we built. You left me when I needed you most. Do you know what it was like, watching you walk away, while I carried the weight of our marriage alone?" The pain in her voice was like a blade, but Ethan didn't flinch away. He forced himself to absorb every word, every ounce of truth she hurled at him. He had avoided it for too long. "I know," he whispered. "I was a coward. I let pride and greed drown out everything that mattered, and when you looked at me with disappointment in your eyes, instead of facing what I had become, I ran. I thought Isabella would fill the emptiness inside me, but all she did was deepen it." Claire's hand tightened on her belly. Her gaze softened for only a moment before hardening again. "And now, you think words can fix what you destroyed? Do you think an apology erases years of pain?" Ethan said firmly, shaking his head. "I don't expect forgiveness tonight or even tomorrow. Maybe not ever. I just need you to know that I see it now. I see what I lost, what I threw away, and I swear I will not run again, not from you, not from our child." His voice broke slightly on the last word, his eyes flicking toward her belly. Tears welled in Claire's eyes, but she blinked them back. She had built walls around herself, brick by brick, after years of disappointment. She couldn't let them fall so easily, not even now. "Promises," she whispered bitterly. "That's all you ever gave me in the end, and every time they turned to dust." Ethan stepped closer, his voice raw with urgency. "Then let me prove it. Don't believe my words, believe my actions. If it takes months, years, whatever time you need, I'll be here. I show you I can be different. I don't want redemption for myself. I want to do right by you, by the child we created, by the love I betrayed." The weight of his confession filled the room. Claire turned her face slightly, staring at the window as tears traced down her cheeks. For so long she had prayed for these words, for acknowledgement of the pain he caused, and now that they came, she didn't know whether to feel relief or anger. Maybe both. Her voice trembled as she finally replied, "You can't undo the nights I cried myself to sleep. You can't erase the months I begged God for strength while you flaunted your new life with her. You can't give me back the years you stole, Ethan." He bowed his head, shame heavy in his chest. "I know. And I won't ask you to forget them. I just want a chance to be here now, to stand by you in this moment and in every moment that follows." The silence that followed was thick, charged with all the weight of their broken past. Claire breathed slowly, her hand circling protectively over her belly. She didn't answer, but she didn't turn him away either. And for Ethan, that was the faintest glimmer of hope. Ethan pulled a chair closer to her bedside, lowering himself with a heaviness that came not from his body, but from his soul. For the first time in years, He didn't care about his business meetings, his reputation, or the mistress who would surely be waiting with fury in her heart. All that mattered was this room, this fragile silence, and the woman who had once been his entire world. Claire watched him warily. She wanted to believe that his words were genuine, but trust was a fragile thing. She remembered the nights when she had begged him to look at her, to listen, to remember who they were before money and ambition had swallowed him whole. Back then, his eyes had been cold, his heart unreachable. Could she trust the warmth she saw in him now? Part of me was always afraid, she whispered, almost to herself. Part of me still hates you for what you did, for leaving me standing in the ruins of our life while you built castles elsewhere. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You have every right to hate me. I hate myself for it, Claire. Every time I saw you in passing, every time I caught whispers of you struggling, I buried the guilt deeper. But seeing you collapse in that street today, his voice quirmed, his chest tightening at the memory, I realized nothing else matters. Not the money, not the power, not Isabella. I let all of that poison me. But you and our child? You're the only truth left in my life. Her breath hitched at the rawness in his tone, but she turned her face away, unwilling to let him see the tears threatening again. And what happens when the guilt fades, Ethan, when the weight of today isn't enough to hold you to your promises? Will you walk away again? His answer was immediate, fierce. No, never again. I can't undo my betrayal, but I can choose differently now. I can stand, and I can fight to be the man you deserved all along. The conviction in his voice unsettled her. She wanted to reject it, to push him out before he could wound her again. But she couldn't ignore the tremor in his voice, the sincerity in his eyes. It wasn't the polished charm of the millionaire everyone admired. It was the broken honesty of the man she had once loved. She placed her hand more firmly on her belly, grounding herself. This child is my world, Ethan. Everything I do now is for them. I will not let anyone, not even you, bring more pain into their life. Do you understand me? He nodded, his eyes glistening. I understand, and I don't ask you to trust me yet. Just let me try. Let me earn the right to be here, for you and for them. Claire's walls trembled. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to tell him it was too late. Another part, the part that remembered the man who once held her hand through storms, who once whispered dreams into her ear, longed to believe him. She closed her eyes, torn between love and fear, hope and anger. When she opened them again, her voice was steadier. You don't get a second chance just because you finally regret what you did. If you want to be here, you'll have to prove it every single day. Words aren't enough anymore, Ethan. A faint smile tugged at his lips, though it was tinged with sorrow. Then I'll prove it. Not by grand gestures, not by wealth or gifts. By showing up, by staying, by never turning my back again. The room fell quiet again. But this time the silence felt different. Not empty, but heavy with possibility. Claire leaned back against her pillows, her hand still guarding the life inside her. Ethan remained by her side, his presence tentative but steadfast. He had confessed his sins. He had laid bare his regrets, and though Claire had not forgiven him, she had not pushed him away. For now, that was enough. It was the first step towards something fragile, uncertain, but perhaps, in time, real. And as Ethan sat there, silently vowing never to falter again, he knew one truth with absolute certainty. This time, he would not walk away. Not from her, and not from their child. The following days unfolded with a rhythm Ethan had never known before. Instead of the endless meetings, the extravagant parties, and the rush of business deals, his mornings began with quiet trips to the hospital. He would arrive with bags of fresh fruit, carefully chosen because the doctor had said Claire needed more vitamins. Some mornings, he brought warm soup from a little family-owned restaurant she used to love, the kind that smelled of home and comfort. The nurses began to recognize him, nodding in approval when they saw his arms full of meals and flowers rather than briefcases and contracts. At first, Claire regarded him with suspicion. Her eyes carried the memory of betrayal, her body tensed every time he walked in. She would thank him politely but distant, her voice stripped of warmth. Ethan understood. He had no right to expect kindness from her, but instead of retreating, he chose patience. If she looked away, he stayed. If she offered only silence, he respected it. If she was too tired to speak, he simply sat by her bed, reading softly from the books she once adored, or sometimes just letting the quiet fill the space between them. The changes in him did not go unnoticed. The staff began whispering about the man who refused to leave his ex-wife's side, who paid every bill without hesitation, who argued with administrators to ensure she received the best care. His gestures were steady, never flashy, almost humble in their simplicity. One evening, when a storm rattled the windows of the hospital, Claire stirred from sleep and found him sitting in the corner chair, his head tilted back, eyes closed in exhaustion. A tray of untouched food sat beside him. Meals he had brought for her, not himself. Something softened in her expression then, though she quickly buried it when she realized he was awake again. Still, he caught the flicker of warmth in her gaze, fleeting but real, and it filled him with a hope he dared not voice. Outside the hospital walls, Isabella's voice still haunted him. She called constantly, leaving messages dripping with venom. "You're throwing your life away on a woman who already ruined you," she hissed in one voicemail. In another, she marked, "Do you really think playing nurse will make her forgive you? She'll never love you again, Ethan." But each time, he pressed delete. He no longer answered. The pull she once had over him was fading like smoke in the wind. What mattered now was not power, not wealth, not Isabella's approval. What mattered was the quiet rise and fall of Claire's breathing, the fragile strength in her hands as she clutched her belly, the child they would soon welcome into the world. The community, too, began to shift in its perception. Gossip that once painted him as a cold-hearted man who had abandoned his wife now turned into murmurs of respect. People saw him in the hospital corridors, carrying fresh laundry, bringing books, speaking gently to nurses. Old acquaintances who once scorned his choices now nodded in approval. "He's changed," they whispered. "Perhaps he's finally learned." But the one person whose judgment mattered most remained cautious. Claire watched him carefully, her trust not easily given, and Ethan accepted that. He knew redemption was not earned in a single grand gesture, but in countless small acts, repeated until they became truth. Weeks passed, and Ethan's consistency began to take root in Claire's guarded heart. She no longer flinched at his presence. Sometimes she even allowed herself to smile faintly when he entered the room, though she quickly turned away. The walls were still there, high and strong, but cracks had begun to form, letting in light little by little. One afternoon, as he set a bouquet of lilies on the bedside table, Claire finally spoke, more than the usual polite words. "You don't have to keep doing this," she murmured, her voice low but steady. "You've done enough. The bills, the food, the visits, it's too much." Ethan looked at her, his expression soft but resolute. "It will never be enough," he admitted. "Not for what I took from you, not for the pain I caused. But if these small things can make your days even a little easier, then, of course, as it takes." She didn't reply, but the silence that followed was different. It was no longer filled with hostility or suspicion. Instead, it carried a fragile thread of possibility, as if she were testing the weight of his words against the heaviness of her memories. Sometimes, when the doctor allowed her brief walks in the garden courtyard, Ethan would steady her by the arm. The first time she allowed him to help, her body trembled, not from weakness but from the intimacy of the gesture. He felt it too, a reminder of the closeness they once shared. Yet he said nothing, moving at her pace, content just to walk in silence under the fading evening light. Isabella did not accept defeat easily. She appeared at his office one morning, furious that he had cut her off. She demanded answers, waving threats like weapons. But Ethan no longer reacted as he once did. Her words bounced against a heart now anchored elsewhere. "You've lost me, Isabella," he said firmly. "Whatever hold you had, it's over. Don't call again." For the first time in years, he felt free of her shadow. Back at the hospital, the whispers of admiration grew louder. Families waiting in the corridors pointed him out as the man who had once lost his way, but now sat faithfully by his ex-wife's side day after day. Some offered him nods of respect, others quietly prayed for him and Claire. Their child, not yet born, had already become a symbol of second chances. Claire, though, remained cautious. Her heart remembered too vividly the nights of loneliness, the betrayal, the abandonment. Forgiveness, she knew, could not be forced. But as she watched Ethan fold blankets, adjust pillows, read softly by her side, and argue with nurses on her behalf, she could not deny the change. The arrogance she once despised was gone. In its place stood a man humbled, a man who had fallen but now chose to rise. One evening, as rain tapped against the window, Ethan placed a hand gently over hers, not demanding, not pleading, just resting there, waiting. For a long moment she didn't move. Then, slowly, she let her fingers curl slightly around his. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. A small act just like his own, and sometimes small acts were the beginning of everything. The day began quietly, almost deceptively so. Claire was stronger now, able to walk around her hospital room without the steadying arm of a nurse. She had started eating more, sleeping better, and though her body still carried the weight of recovery, her spirit seemed to be lifting in small, cautious ways. Ethan was by her side, as he always was, reading aloud from a novel she had once loved. The steady cadence of his voice filled the room, calm and unhurried, as though the world outside no longer demanded his time. But peace rarely lasted long when Isabella was involved. She had been silent for weeks after Ethan's final rejection, but her silence had only been the gathering of a storm. That afternoon, the hospital corridor echoed with the sharp click of her heels, each step brimming with fury. Heads turned as she strode toward Claire's room, her expensive dress clinging like armor, her lips curled in disdain. The nurses tried to stop her, but Isabella's voice cut through the hallway. "Move. I'm here to remind Ethan of the mistake he's making." Patients peeked out of their rooms, curious, uneasy. By the time she flung open Claire's door, there was already a small crowd gathering in the corridor. Claire flinched at the sudden intrusion. Her body tensed, one hand instinctively reaching for her stomach, as if to shield the child within. Ethan rose immediately, his jaw set, his eyes hard. "Get out," he said firmly, stepping between Isabella and Claire. But Isabella only laughed, the sound brittle and cruel. "Look at you," she sneered, her gaze sliding past Ethan to the woman in the bed. "Pathetic, weak, a burden. Do you think taking care of her makes you noble? She's nothing but dead weight dragging you down." Claire's face went pale, her lips parting in shock. The words cut deep, not just because of their cruelty, but because they echoed the fears she sometimes carried, silently. That she was too broken, too fragile, too much trouble to love again. Ethan's chest tightened. He could feel the tension in Claire, the sting of Isabella's venom hitting its mark. For a moment, anger surged through him, the kind of rage that once fueled his ambition, his greed. But now, it burned for something different, for protection, for love, for the family he was determined to keep safe. He stepped forward, his voice clear and steady, louder than Isabella's venom. "Enough. You don't get to speak to her that way. You don't get to speak to her at all." The corridor outside had grown silent, the nurses, patients, and visitors frozen, listening. Ethan's words rang out, carrying weight far beyond the room. "The only woman I care about," he declared, his voice unwavering, "is the mother of my child." He turned slightly, his gaze softening as it landed on Claire. "She is my family, she is my life, and nothing you say can change that." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Claire's eyes widened, her throat tightening as tears welled against her will. She had expected many things from Ethan. Guilt, gestures, perhaps even desperation, but not this. Not a public renunciation of Isabella, and a declaration so raw it pierced through her carefully guarded heart. Isabella's face twisted, fury spilling from her like poison. "You'll regret this, Ethan," she spat. "You think she'll forgive you? You think she'll ever truly love you again? You're deluding yourself." But Ethan didn't flinch. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, the quiet conviction in his eyes a shield against her venom. "Leave," he said simply. "You have no place here, not anymore." For the first time, Isabella realized her power had truly ended. The crowd in the hallway no longer looked at her with admiration or envy, but with thinly veiled disgust. She had lost, and worse, she had been humiliated in the very arena she once controlled. Public opinion. With a final, frustrated cry, she turned on her heel and stormed away, the echo of her steps fading down the corridor. Inside the room, silence fell heavy. Ethan turned back to Claire, his breath unsteady though his words had been strong. She stared at him, eyes shimmering, unable to hide the emotion his declaration had stirred. Her lips trembled, as if searching for words, but none came. Instead, a single tear slipped down her cheek. Ethan's heart clenched. He longed to reach for her, to wipe it away, but he held himself back. This was her moment, not his. Whatever she felt, whatever she chose to do with it, it had to come freely. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft and unsteady. You meant that?" "Everything I am," he answered without hesitation. "I've made mistakes, Claire, too many to count. But when I say you're the only woman I care about, I mean it. Not just because of the child we're bringing into this world, but because I see now what I should have seen all along. You are the best part of me." Her breath caught, her hand tightening around the blanket. She looked away, unable to meet his eyes for long, but the weight of his words lingered in the air between them. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe he might truly be different. The incident with Isabella spread quickly through the hospital. By evening, everyone seemed to know what had happened. Nurses whispered about the scene, praising Ethan for standing up so firmly. Visitors who had witnessed it shared the story, their voices carrying admiration rather than judgment. For once, the gossip that surrounded Ethan wasn't laced with scorn, it was filled with respect. But for Claire, the real turning point had been quieter, more intimate. It wasn't the crowd's reaction or Isabella's retreat that mattered most. It was the way Ethan had looked at her when he spoke, as though no one else existed, as though she was the only truth in his life. That look stayed with her long after the noise had faded. When the time finally came for her discharge, she felt a swirl of emotions. Relief, because the sterile walls of the hospital had begun to feel suffocating. Fear, because going home meant facing a new chapter she wasn't sure she was ready for. And uncertainty, because Ethan's presence in her life no longer fit neatly into the category of past, where she had tried to keep him. The morning of her release, Ethan arrived early. He carried her bags with a quiet efficiency, making sure every prescription and instruction from the doctors was carefully followed. He checked the car twice, ensuring it was warm enough, comfortable enough, safe enough for her ride home. Claire watched him from the bed, her eyes narrowing as if studying a stranger who resembled the man she once knew, but moved with a gentleness she barely recognized. When the nurse finally wheeled her to the exit, Ethan walked beside her, his hand hovering near her arm as though ready to catch her if she stumbled. Outside, the air was crisp, the world buzzing with ordinary life, and yet Claire felt suspended between the past and the future. In the car, Ethan opened the door and helped her in, adjusting the seatbelt with careful precision. She wanted to resist, to insist she was capable, but something in her softened. The fight seemed unnecessary, even hollow. Instead, she allowed him the small victory, telling herself it was just easier this way. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She was letting him care for her, not out of necessity, but out of something she couldn't quite name yet. The drive was quiet at first, the hum of the engine filling the space between them. Claire stared out the window, her thoughts racing. Ethan gripped the wheel, his jaw tight, as though restraining himself from saying too much too soon. Finally, she broke the silence. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, her voice carrying more weight than the words alone. "Do what?" he asked gently, glancing at her. "Stand up for me. In front of everyone, declare what you did." Ethan's lips pressed together. "I didn't do it for them," he said quietly. "I did it for you, and for us. You needed to hear it, and I needed to say it." Her chest tightened, a lump forming in her throat. She turned away again, blinking rapidly against the tears threatening to fall. For so long she had carried the burden of being unloved, unwanted, cast aside. To hear him speak so openly, so firmly, felt like a salve on wounds she hadn't realized were still bleeding. When they reached her house, Ethan carried the bags inside without hesitation. Claire hesitated at the doorway, unsure whether to let him follow. The threshold seemed symbolic, an invitation not just into her home, but into her fragile attempt at rebuilding her life. She stood there, torn between the instinct to protect herself and the quiet longing for companionship she had tried to suppress. Ethan noticed her pause. He set the bags down and looked at her, his expression open, patient. "I'll only come in if you want me to," he said softly. "If you'd rather I leave, I will. No questions asked." Her heart pounded. She studied his face, searching for traces of manipulation, of arrogance, of the man who had once broken her. But all she saw was sincerity, steady and unflinching. Finally, with a deep breath, she stepped aside. "Come in," she whispered. The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was profound. For Ethan, it was a door to redemption. For Claire, it was a fragile step toward trust. And for both of them, it was the beginning of something new, a turning point neither could ignore. Inside, the air smelled of familiarity, of memories both sweet and painful. Ethan moved carefully, as though aware of the sacredness of the space he had once taken for granted. Claire watched him, her heart conflicted but undeniably stirred. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to find out. The morning sun painted the sky in soft strokes of gold as Ethan carried another box from the truck. Claire stood at the doorway of her new home, watching him move with determination. The house was modest but warm, far safer and brighter than the old apartment she had been struggling to keep together. The walls were freshly painted, the garden outside trimmed neatly, and every detail had been thought out with her and the baby in mind. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe in a place that wasn't weighed down by memories of loneliness and fear. Ethan placed the box inside the living room, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and offered her a tentative smile. It was a smile that no longer carried arrogance or superiority, but one tinged with humility. He wasn't trying to impress her, he was simply there, working quietly, step by step. Claire crossed her arms, conflicted emotions swirling within her. Gratitude was undeniable. She had never expected such devotion from him again, but scars ran deep, and she wasn't ready to let them vanish simply because he was trying now. As the hours passed, Ethan unpacked furniture, arranged baby supplies, and even set up a crib in what would become the nursery. Claire followed him into the room, her eyes softening as she saw the pastel-colored curtains he had hung and the stuffed bear placed carefully on the bed. She ran her fingers along the crib's wooden edge, blinking back tears. A moment later, her emotion flickering across her face but said nothing. He had learned that silence often spoke louder than words, and he wanted her to know that this time he would give her the space she needed. When the last box was unpacked, Ethan sat down at the kitchen table, breathing heavily from the labor. Claire poured him a glass of water, placing it in front of him without a word. He looked up, surprised by the gesture, and their eyes met. For a fleeting moment, the years of bitterness seemed to fade, replaced by something fragile yet undeniable. A recognition of the bond they once shared. Claire broke the silence. "You didn't have to do all of this." Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. Ethan shook his head slowly. "Yes, I did. I should have done it years ago. You deserve better than what I gave you." His tone was steady, filled with sincerity that was impossible to ignore. Claire pressed her lips together, holding back the instinct to dismiss his words. Deep down, she wanted to believe him. Deep down, she wanted to imagine a life where he was truly there, not just as a shadow of the past, but as a partner for the future. That evening, Ethan insisted on cooking. Claire leaned against the doorway, watching as he fumbled with pots and pans. It was awkward at first. He had never been the one to handle meals before, yet there was something almost endearing in the way he kept glancing at the recipe on his phone, determined to get it right. The aroma of roasted chicken and herbs filled the air, and for the first time in a long while, the house smelled like home. When they finally sat down together, the meal wasn't perfect, but Claire found herself smiling anyway. Across the table, Ethan noticed her faint smile and felt a swell of hope. He reached for his fork, pausing as he caught sight of the empty chair beside them. He nodded toward it. "I thought maybe we should leave that seat there, for the baby." His voice trembled slightly, not from fear but from the depth of the moment. Claire looked at the chair, then back at him. Tears welled in her eyes, uninvited but unspoken. She clutched her belly gently, whispering, "It feels real now." Ethan swallowed hard, emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "It is real, and I'm not going anywhere this time." The evening passed quietly, but the silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful, carrying with it the possibility of something new. Claire wasn't ready to forgive everything, but she couldn't deny the changes she saw. Small acts of consistency had grown into something larger, and now, sitting at the table with him, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for them. The days that followed were filled with small but significant routines. Ethan visited every morning, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes helping her organize the nursery. Other times he would simply sit with her as she rested, reading aloud from a book or listening to the baby's heartbeat together. Each moment chipped away at the walls around her heart, though she guarded them carefully. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. But she could no longer deny that his actions matched his words. One afternoon, while unpacking a final box, Claire found an old photo of them from years ago. They were standing on a beach, their arms wrapped around each other, laughter frozen in time. Her heart clenched as she stared at it. Ethan entered the room quietly, noticing the photo in her hand. He didn't try to take it or explain it away. Instead, he simply said, "That was one of the best days of my life." Claire looked at him, searching for traces of the man she once knew. For a moment, she saw him, the Ethan who had loved her before pride and greed had torn them apart. Later that week, the community held a small gathering to welcome her into the neighborhood. People who once whispered harshly about her situation now approached with warmth, glancing at Ethan with curiosity. He stayed close to her side, not to control but to support. When someone asked if he was antiviral child, Ethan answered firmly, "I'm here for her and our child." That's not changing. Claire's chest tightened at his words, realizing he was no longer hiding or running. He was standing beside her, openly, without shame or hesitation. That evening, back at the house, Claire finally addressed what had been sitting in her heart. "You've changed," she said softly, sitting on the couch with her hands resting on her belly. Ethan sat across from her, leaning forward. "I had to. I lost everything that mattered once. I won't let that happen again." His eyes glistened, but his voice remained steady. "I know I can't erase the past, Claire, but I want to build something new with you, even if it takes the rest of my life to earn your trust." Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I don't know if I can forget." Ethan nodded. "I don't expect you to. I just want the chance to prove I'm not the man who left you behind." Vulnerability in his tone struck her deeply, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to guard her tears. They fell freely, but they weren't only tears of pain, they carried the weight of healing too. Weeks later, as they sat down for dinner once more, the house was filled with warmth. The table was set with simple dishes, but in the middle stood a small vase of fresh flowers Ethan had picked that morning. Claire looked at the empty chair again, this time with less sadness and more anticipation. She glanced at Ethan, who was watching her silently, waiting for her to speak. Finally, she whispered, "I see it now. You're different." Ethan's breath caught, his heart pounding as if he had been waiting years for those words. He didn't rush toward her or smother her with promises. Instead, he simply nodded, whispering, "Thank you." It was enough. The room felt lighter, as though a weight had lifted from both of them. Claire reached across the table, placing her hand over his for the first time in years. It was tentative, cautious, but undeniably real. As night settled outside, the two of them sat at the table in quiet peace. The past hadn't vanished, but the future stretched before them like an open road. In the corner of the room, the crib awaited, a silent promise of the new life they were preparing to welcome. And for the first time in a long time, Claire felt something she had thought was lost forever: hope.